Dust rose like a ghost from the wooden street, curling into the last light of dusk. The air smelled of lantern oil and sweat, of horses shifting in their traces, of a crowd hungry for cruelty. I remember that night as clear as the lines on my own hands, the night they laughed at a boy too thin to fight, too weak to run, his leg dragging like a shadow behind him. They laughed until their throats were raw, and the sound was like knives in the air. But there was one man who did not laugh. Elias Boone stood apart, tall and weather-worn, his eyes carrying the silence of someone who had buried more than he ever spoke of. Out on his ranch, Elias had known only echoes. The wind sang through fence rails, the boards of his cabin creaked with memory, and the wide field spread out like a prayer. No one answered. Once he had dreamed of filling that land with family, but those dreams had faded like the paint on an old sign. Folks in town called him a ghost in his own right, a man of few words and fewer smiles. He was steady, dependable, but hollowed out. Loneliness had a way of carving a man deeper than the rivers cut the canyons. That night, on the courthouse steps, the orphans were lined up like cattle, each child judged by weight of muscle and health of limb. Caleb was the last to be called forward, a boy of 12 with eyes too old for his face. His hair fell ragged over his brow, his clothes barely clung to him, and his left leg buckled inward, making him limp with each step. The crowd chuckled, muttered, and sneered. "A rancher can't use that," someone called. Another added, "He'll eat more than he's worth." Caleb dropped his gaze, cheeks burning, his fists curling in shame. The auctioneer's voice faltered. No one wanted him. That was when Elias Boone stepped from the edge of the crowd. He didn't speak. He simply laid down a silver coin, more than the boy was valued at, more than sense would suggest. The crowd erupted, laughter rolling like thunder. "Boone's gone mad," Virgil Pike jeered, leaning against a post with his hat tipped back. "Takin home a cripple? Man must be starved for company." Caleb flinched at every word, but then Elias's hand came down, large, steady, warm, on the boy's frail shoulder. No speech, no defense, just a silent act that quieted the storm in Caleb's chest. The next morning, gossip ran through the town like wildfire. Women in bonnets whispered behind gloved hands. Ranch hands spat in the dust, shaking their heads. Sheriff Braddock, not unkind but practical, pulled Elias aside. "You know what you're doing, Boone? That boy'll be more burden than help." Elias just met his eyes and said nothing. Words weren't his way. Pike, puffed up with his own wealth, barked a laugh. "Don't worry, Sheriff. That boy'll break Boone before he mends him." But Elias didn't bend. The first days at the ranch tested them both. Caleb tried, he truly did, but his body betrayed him. He stumbled with buckets, slipped in mud, and once fell face first carrying a saddle. Each mistake flushed his face redder with shame. Yet Elias never raised his voice, never cursed the boy's weakness. He would simply steady the work himself, then show Caleb slower ways, clever tricks to spare his leg. When they ate, Elias waited at the table until Caleb, limping and weary, lowered himself into the chair. Small gestures, quiet mercies. They built something fragile in those silences. Still, Caleb carried the weight of every laugh from town. He kept his eyes low, afraid of being a burden too heavy to bear. Elias, though silent, seemed to hold the boy in a patience that spoke louder than words. Nights stretched long, filled with the sound of wind rattling windows and the low groan of the house. Caleb sat near the fire, watching Elias mend tack or carve wood, the air between them heavy but slowly warming. It was Clara Whitmore, the school teacher, who saw the shift before anyone else. She passed by the ranch one afternoon, bringing a basket of books. Caleb had never learned his letters properly. Clara's voice was gentle as she suggested lessons, her gaze flicking to Elias. "He's sharp. You can see it in his eyes. Give him a chance." Elias nodded once, his expression unreadable, but when Clara looked away, his eyes lingered on the boy with something softer, something almost like pride. Evenings changed after that. Caleb, bent over pages by lamplight, whispered out words, halting but determined. Elias sat nearby, listening without letting on, as if the sound of the boy's stumbling voice was filling cracks in walls that had been hollow too long. The town still whispered, still shook their heads at the sight of a crippled boy working a ranch he couldn't keep up with. But in those quiet days, I saw the start of something the town could not, a broken man and a broken boy finding in each other a strange and steady kind of mending. And I'll tell you this much, the laughter that once cut the air began to lose its bite, though no one knew it yet. For there was a strength stirring on that ranch, born not of muscle or speed, but of patience, of endurance, of love unspoken. They thought Elias Boone had chosen weakness. But in that weakness, he was learning what no crowd could see. The seasons turned as they always do, with dust giving way to rain and rain to brittle heat. Caleb began to learn the rhythm of the land. He could not ride like other boys, could not run the length of the pasture, but he learned to mend fences from a seated stool, to calm skittish horses with a steady voice, to read the sky like scripture. Clara's books became maps of a wider world, and soon Caleb's mind moved sharper than many grown men in town. Where his body faltered, his wit carried him. And Elias Boone, though he said little, began to watch the boy with a pride so quiet it glowed like a lantern hidden beneath a coat. But the town would not let them forget. Virgil Pike, with his smug smile and fat herd, made a sport of cruelty. He called Caleb dead weight, spat in the dirt near his feet, and once barked loud enough for all to hear, "Boone's ranch will rot under a cripple's hand." Boys in the street followed Pike's example, hurling pebbles, snickering at Caleb's limp. The boy kept his chin down, but his shoulders hunched with shame. One afternoon, outside the general store, Pike stepped too close. Caleb froze. Before Pike could laugh again, Elias was there, silent as ever. He stood eye to eye with the man, saying nothing, only letting the weight of his gaze settle heavy. Pike's smirk faltered. He turned away muttering. Caleb watched and understood. Sometimes dignity was louder than fists. The summer brought its trial in the form of storm clouds boiling over the plains. Thunder rolled, and the herd, already restless from drought, broke wild. Fences snapped like twigs, hooves thundered across dry earth. Men shouted, lanterns swayed in the wind, dust rose so thick it was hard to breathe. Elias mounted his horse, driving himself into the chaos, his figure swallowed in the storm. Caleb, heart pounding, knew he could not run with the others. Yet he saw the herd veering toward a gully that would kill them all. His breath caught, but he seized a lantern, dragging himself up the ridge with pain clawing at every step. The storm battered him, dust blinded him, yet still he climbed, crawling where his leg failed him. At the ridge's peak, with the herd roaring below like thunder itself, he swung the lantern high. The wild light cut through the dust, a beacon swaying, guiding. The cattle turned, following the glow back toward safer ground. When it was done, when the last cow bawled its way into the corral, Caleb collapsed, body trembling, hands bleeding from stone and thorn. Elias was there in a heartbeat, scooping him into arms that had once carried only loss. His voice, so rarely heard, broke the night in a low whisper, "You're my son now." The words struck deeper than any wound Caleb had ever carried. He clung to Elias, weak but smiling through tears. At dawn, the town gathered, expecting ruin. Instead, they saw the herd safe, the fences half mended, and word spread of how the crippled boy had climbed into the storm and saved it all. Whispers shifted, tones softened. Even Sheriff Braddock, who once doubted, tipped his hat. "Boys got grit," he said simply. The laughter that had once chased Caleb through the streets was quiet now. Virgil Pike scoffed, but his voice carried less power than before. The people had seen. They had watched a boy they scorned stand taller than any of them. Elias, standing with Caleb at his side, did not boast or demand thanks. Instead, before the gathered crowd, he laid a hand on the boy's shoulder and spoke with steady calm. "This ranch will be his one day." A murmur swept the people. Some gasped, some nodded in solemn respect. Even Pike's sneer faltered at the weight of the moment. Caleb, though pale and bandaged, lifted his chin and met the eyes of those who had mocked him. For the first time, he did not look away. And so the laughter died on the lips of the cruel. The ranch, once silent with loss, echoed now with a bond no storm could tear apart. I tell you this as an old truth, they laughed when Elias Boone chose weakness. But in weakness, I saw strength, the kind that endures longer than muscle, longer than wealth, longer than pride. Remember it well, dignity is not something the world grants you. It is something you claim, one quiet act at a time. And sometimes the smallest flame burns bright enough to guide a whole herd home.